Title: A millionaire dresses up as a garbage collector to test his son's girlfriend. What she said left him horrified. The sleek, silver Jaguar purred as it slid into the vast, gated mansion of the Steinfeld estate. Mr. Albert Steinfeld, a self-made millionaire, stepped out of his luxury vehicle and gazed upon his sprawling empire, a symbol of decades of hard work, sleepless nights, and relentless ambition. The sprawling gardens, the gleaming pool, and the impeccable architecture of the mansion gave no hint of the struggles he had faced in his youth. Albert was a man of principle, hardened by his humble beginnings. He had clawed his way up from nothing, from poverty and despair, to become one of the wealthiest men in the city. The only thing more important to him than his empire was his son, Daniel. Albert had ensured that Daniel wanted for nothing, but he also feared his son would never truly understand the value of hard work, integrity, and loyalty. These principles had shaped Albert's life, and he worried that Daniel's privileged upbringing might have blinded him to their importance. As he walked through the pristine corridors of his home, his mind wandered to an issue that had been troubling him for weeks: Daniel's girlfriend, Emily. Emily was stunning, there was no denying that. With her perfectly styled hair, designer clothes, and charming smile, she had captivated Daniel from the moment they met. But Albert had always felt uneasy about her. Something about her felt too rehearsed, too calculated. Every compliment she gave seemed designed to flatter, every conversation felt crafted to impress. Was it real? Or was she, like so many others in Albert's life, simply after his wealth? Albert had seen it all before: the fake friends, the insincere smiles, the greed lurking beneath polished exteriors. He didn't want his son to fall victim to someone who saw him as a stepping stone. As much as he trusted Daniel's judgment, Albert couldn't shake the feeling that Emily was hiding something. He had no concrete proof, only a father's intuition. And that was enough to spark a plan that would reveal Emily's true nature. Albert knew he needed to test Emily, to see who she was when faced with someone who couldn't benefit her, someone who didn't fit into her pristine world. That's when the idea struck him. What if he could see how she treated people she deemed beneath her? What if he could witness her unfiltered, raw reactions when she believed no one important was watching? The next morning, as the city began to stir with the hum of everyday life, Albert made his decision. He would disguise himself as a garbage collector, a lowly figure in Emily's eyes, someone she would never imagine as the man behind the vast Steinfeld fortune. He'd arrange for a casual encounter with her. But it wouldn't be just a brief meeting. He would place himself in situations where Emily would be forced to engage with him repeatedly, and through these interactions, her true character would either shine, or shatter. That same day, Albert called his trusted friend, Sam, a costume designer who had worked with some of the biggest names in Hollywood. Sam owed Albert more than a few favors, and he readily agreed to help. The disguise would be flawless. Albert would not only look the part, but he'd also blend into the world of garbage collectors seamlessly. By the end of the week, the transformation was complete. Gone was the sharp, meticulously dressed millionaire. In his place stood an older man, hunched with age, wearing tattered clothes and a reflective vest. His hair was now a tangled mess of grays, his face weathered by an expertly applied layer of makeup, and his hands rough and calloused. He looked like someone who had spent years working thankless, grueling jobs. Even his accent changed, now rougher and more working class. No one would ever suspect this garbage collector was the same man who lived in the grand Steinfeld mansion. It was time to see who Emily really was. The plan was simple. Albert knew that Daniel and Emily spent most of their weekends in the city center, often visiting cafes, boutiques, and other upscale locations. He arranged with the local sanitation department to ride along with their crew. It didn't take much convincing. The head of the department was an old friend of Albert's, and with some discreet funding, Albert secured a temporary position on the team. He would ride along on their usual route and time his encounters with Emily carefully. Saturday arrived, and Albert's heart raced with a mix of anticipation and unease. His hands clenched the broomstick as the garbage truck rumbled through the streets of the city. He had never been more nervous in his life, but he knew this was the only way to truly uncover the truth about Emily. The first encounter came as Emily and Daniel stepped out of an expensive cafe, laughing as they walked down the street. Albert, broom in hand, shuffled toward them, keeping his head down. He deliberately stumbled, spilling a small bin of trash near their feet. "Hey, watch where you're going, old man," Emily snapped, her tone sharp. She didn't even glance in his direction as she stepped around the garbage. Daniel, however, immediately bent down to help clean it up, offering the old man a sympathetic smile. "Sorry about that," Daniel said kindly. "Let me give you a hand." Emily rolled her eyes and sighed impatiently. "Daniel, we're going to be late. Let's go." But Daniel ignored her, and Albert watched silently as his son helped gather the trash. Emily stood a few feet away, her arms crossed and her foot tapping, clearly irritated by the delay. Albert noted the coldness in her eyes, the way she barely acknowledged the presence of someone she deemed unimportant. The encounter left a bitter taste in Albert's mouth, but it wasn't enough to make any conclusions yet. Maybe she was just in a hurry, he thought. Maybe it was just a momentary lapse in judgment. But the second encounter would remove all doubt. A few days later, Albert planned another encounter. This time, he would make sure to be in a place where Emily was alone. He needed to see how she behaved without Daniel's influence. Emily was at a boutique, shopping for new clothes. As she exited the store with several large bags, Albert approached her once again, this time pushing a rusty cart filled with trash. He deliberately bumped into her, causing one of her bags to fall to the ground. Emily's face contorted with anger. "Are you blind, you idiot?" she snapped, her voice dripping with disdain. She didn't bend down to pick up the bag. Instead, she glared at Albert as if he were something disgusting she had stepped in. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," Albert mumbled in his best gruff voice, reaching down to pick up the bag for her. "Don't touch my things," she shrieked, stepping back as if his touch would contaminate her expensive belongings. "Just stay away from me, you filthy." She stopped mid-sentence as she realized people were starting to stare. She quickly forced a smile and brushed her hair behind her ear, trying to regain her composure. "Just, don't let it happen again." Albert felt his blood boil, but he kept his face neutral. As he handed her the bag, Emily snatched it from his hand without so much as a thank you and hurried away, her heels clicking angrily against the pavement. Albert stood there, watching her retreating figure, his heart heavy with disappointment. He had seen enough. Emily's true colors were clear. She was a person who treated those beneath her with contempt, someone who saw people as either useful or disposable. And worst of all, she had no idea that the filthy garbage man she had insulted was the father of the man she claimed to love. But Albert wasn't done. He had to be sure. He needed to see how far Emily's selfishness and cruelty would go. The final test came the following weekend. Albert had arranged for a friend to stage an emergency, a fake car breakdown in the middle of the street, with Albert once again playing the role of the garbage collector nearby. As planned, Emily and Daniel were walking toward the restaurant where they had dinner reservations. Suddenly, a woman in a distressed voice called for help. Her car was stranded in the middle of the road, smoke billowing from the engine. Daniel immediately started toward the woman to offer assistance, but Emily grabbed his arm. "Daniel, don't," she hissed. "We'll be late for our reservation. Let someone else deal with it." "But she needs help," Daniel protested, trying to pull away. "There's literally a garbage man right there," Emily snapped, pointing toward Albert, who was standing by his cart, watching the scene unfold. "It's his job to deal with this kind of thing, not yours. Let's just go." Daniel hesitated, looking torn. But Emily's grip on his arm tightened, and with a pleading look, she said, "Please, Daniel. We never get any time to ourselves anymore. Let's just enjoy our evening." Reluctantly, Daniel allowed himself to be led away, glancing back at the stranded woman as they walked off. Albert, his heart breaking, stepped forward to help the woman, unable to believe the callousness he had just witnessed. Emily had failed every test, and Albert knew what he had to do. The next evening, Albert invited Emily and Daniel to the mansion for dinner. He greeted them in his usual attire, an impeccable suit, his hair neatly combed, the very picture of wealth and power. Emily smiled sweetly at him, completely unaware of the role he had played in her recent encounters. As they sat down to dinner, Albert couldn't help but notice the way Emily's eyes roved around the room, taking in the opulence, the expensive paintings on the walls, the glimmering chandelier. She looked at Daniel with a sense of satisfaction, as if she had already secured her place in this luxurious world. Halfway through the meal, Albert set down his fork and looked directly at Emily. "Emily," he began, his voice calm but firm, "there's something I need to discuss with you." Emily's smile faltered slightly, but she quickly regained her composure. "Of course, Mr. Steinfeld. What is it?" Albert leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. "Do you remember a few days ago, when you ran into a garbage collector outside the boutique?" Emily blinked, clearly confused by the sudden change in topic. Yes, I think so." "Why?" Albert's expression darkened. "That garbage collector was me." The color drained from Emily's face as she stared at him, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to process his words. What? That's impossible. I disguised myself as a garbage collector to see how you would treat someone you thought was beneath you," Albert continued, his voice cold and unyielding. "And what I saw left me horrified." Daniel looked between his father and Emily, clearly confused. "Dad, what's going on?" Albert turned to his son, his expression softening. "I wanted to make sure that the woman you were planning to spend your life with was someone who truly cared about you for who you are, not for your money or your family name. So I tested her." Emily's eyes filled with panic as she realized the gravity of the situation. "Daniel, I didn't know it was him. I thought he was just some random." "That's exactly the problem, Emily," Albert interrupted, his voice sharp. "You thought he was just some random garbage man, and you treated him like he was nothing. You treated everyone around you like they were beneath you. Is that how you would treat Daniel's family? His friends? Is that how you would treat him if he didn't have all of this? Daniel's face turned pale as he processed his father's words. He looked at Emily, his eyes filled with disappointment and hurt. Is that true, Emily? Is that how you really feel? Emily opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. She realized there was no way to talk her way out of this. The truth had been laid bare, and there was no hiding from it now. Daniel stood up from the table, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. I can't believe this, he muttered, running a hand through his hair. He turned to his father, his voice strained. I thought she was different. I thought she loved me. Albert placed a comforting hand on his son's shoulder. I'm sorry, son. But it's better you find out now than later. Emily, tears streaming down her face, stood up as well, reaching out toward Daniel. Daniel, please, I do love you. I made a mistake, but I can change, But Daniel shook his head, his expression hardening. No, Emily. It's over. I can't be with someone who treats people like that. With that, he turned and walked out of the dining room, leaving Emily standing there, devastated and alone. Albert watched her for a moment, then stood up and quietly followed his son. He had done what he had to do, but it didn't make the situation any less painful. He had hoped, for Daniel's sake, that Emily would pass the test. But now, at least, they could both move forward, free from deception and lies. As the door to the mansion closed behind them, the weight of the evening settled over them like a heavy fog. But Albert knew that, in the end, the truth had been worth the cost. The end.